Salve omnes, it's Magister Compton, and today we're going to cover the grammar in chapters 30 and 31. So let's get down to it. There we go. All right, so we're talking today about fourth conjugation verbs, accusatives of space and time, and fifth declension nouns. So this will wrap up all of the conjugations and all of the noun declensions for the end of Latin 1. All right, so we're going to do fourth conjugation verbs first. You can spot these because when you look at the vocab, the infinitive has an IRE in it. Okay? And the third principal part's usually going to be iwi. And the fourth part usually is going to be itus. So kind of nicely bookends the first conjugation, which usually was awi in the third part and atus in the fourth part. Kind of interesting how that works. We'll see that same thing with fifth declension and how it's kind of a bookend to first declension. But yeah, iwi and itus, though there's some exceptions. If you look at the weni or the wenio compounds, you'll notice they go weni and wentus. But that's probably the big standout. Most other ones are going to go like you see here. The present stem you can form one of two ways. You can either take the first principal part and remove the O, which is what we did for third and third conjugation IO, or you can go back to the old way of doing it and take the second principal part and remove the RE. The one reason why I like doing first part minus O and kind of following what third and third IO do is because you still have to do some of the things that third and third IO do because we still have an I in play. And so, for example, when you make the imperfect tense, you still have to add an E before you do bomb, boss, bot. So it's going to be E-ab-bomb, E-ab-boss, E-ab-bot. If we follow the rules from third IO, then that's, you remember that. If you do second principal part minus RE, you might think, well, that's just like first and second. All I got to do is have the E and be done. You can't. You have to add an E still. Okay? So I think first principal part minus O is the best option, but you can do it both ways if you're forming the verb. Okay? So when you conjugate, it's going to mostly look like third conjugation IO. You take off the O, there's an I left, you add the endings OST or rister or E-bomb, E-boss, E-bot, or amazet. Okay? Nothing's going to change there. There's one major exception in the present passive because in third IO and third, the second person singular was eris. But in fourth, it's eris. So take a look here. So we've got the present tense chart here. Singular audior, audiris, auditor, audimer, audimini, audiuntor. So if you see auderis with an E, that would have to be future tense. Because, or actually it would be audieris. There would be no E at all. So when you form the second person singular in the present, it's audiris, not auderis, like third IO does. Okay? But otherwise, you can see, audior, auditor, audimer, dimini, diuntor. That's exactly what a third IO conjugation verb would look like too. Okay? So that's fourth. As long as you know the vocab, you're going to be okay reading. Again, forming pretty much like you did for third IO. All right? So we're going to just keep going with this video because each topic is so short. All right? So next up, we have the accusatives of space and time. So the accusative of space is how we're going to show the distance someone travels, the distance someone goes. And you do not use a preposition in English, you don't use one in Latin, you do use one in English. So here's an example. Marcus decem pedes cecedit, so our good friend Marcus. So Marcus cecedit, he fell. Fell how far? Decem pedes, he fell 10 feet. If you said just 10 feet, English would totally understand what you meant by that. All right? But the 4 just reminds us that we're talking about a distance that he fell, the measurement of how far he went. Okay? So that's the accusative of space. So usually when you have this, it's going to be with those phrases mille passus and milia passuum that are on your vocab list. Those are the terms for mile and for miles, respectively. So, you might see mille passus, 1,000 steps, 1 mile. You might see tres milia possum, 3 miles, or tria milia, because milia is always neuter. So tria milia possum. So that would be 3 miles. All right. But yeah, just make sure you say 4 when you do encounter it as an accusative. The other one, and the more common one, is this accusative of time. And we often call it the accusative of time, how long, or of time duration. And this is how Latin's going to show you how long someone does something. So here's our example. Marcus tres dies iter fecit. Marcus traveled how long? For 3 days. Again, you probably could get away without saying the for. English would probably know what you meant. But saying for does remind us that it takes them that long to do it, not that this is within the time frame he did it. He didn't travel within 3 days. He traveled for 3 days. So the for is a little bit more important here. Okay? But again, if you encounter a time phrase that's in the accusative like this one, then just make sure you're saying for. You understand that you're doing this action for that length of time. All right, lastly, fifth declension nouns. So our example here is res rei, and it's feminine as most fifths will be. Dies can be masculine in certain situations, and if you look at the vocab slides, you'll see what that is. And there are no neuter nouns. So just like I said, fourth is kind of a good bookend for first conjugation. Fifth declension is kind of a nice bookend for first declension because it's very similar. There's that, there's little masculine, there's some but not much, mostly feminine, no neuter. So that's really the same. You can say the same about first and fifth in that way. Okay? The dominant vowel is E, as you can see from the example up there, res, rei. And then here's the endings. So A's, ei, em, a. A's, arum, abus, A's, abus. So you've got all of our universal rules in play here. A's and ae, those are given. Ei, the dative, you've got I paired with the dominant vowel. You've got em, the accusative. You've got long e, so the dominant vowel by itself with a long mark in the ablative. And then A's, dominant vowel plus s in the accusative plural. A's in the nominative because it repeats the accusative. Arum, genitive plural ends in with the dominant vowel, often with an R in there. And then abus for dative and ablative because that's one of the 3 endings you can use here, is, ibus, and abus. So it makes sense you'd use abus here since it begins with an E. So everything begins with an E. That's one nice thing about this. There's no I or any other exception vowel in here. Everything starts with an E. So yeah, you might once in a while confuse it with a third, especially with em or a's, but if you're encountering a word with an ending that starts with an E, or there's an E before what you know is the ending, you're probably dealing with a fifth declension noun. They're not very common. You have most of them on your vocab list. Fides, species, those would be a couple others that you might encounter in your vocab, but yeah, just not very many of them. That's why Latin doesn't usually teach them very early. So, okay. So we've talked about fourth conjugation verbs. We've talked about the accusatives of duration of space and time, and fifth declension nouns. So if you have any other questions, certainly ask them in class. You're going to see this stuff in your sentences and in the stories, so do pay attention for all that. And until then, vale te omnes.